He never liked Ryan and always thought Ryan was intimidated by me. My mom nodded and admitted she'd worried I was making myself smaller to make Ryan comfortable. She said she noticed I stopped talking about work accomplishments around him and changed the subject when anyone asked about my job. I felt embarrassed that they'd seen it when I hadn't fully recognized it myself. My dad reached across the table and squeezed my hand. He told me he was proud of me for choosing myself and my career, that any man worth having would celebrate my success instead of resenting it. Monday at work, I was managing a major trial enrollment deadline that required coordinating between 3 different research sites. We needed to hit our enrollment target by Friday, or risk losing funding for the next phase. I spent the week in back-to-back meetings, reviewing protocols, troubleshooting site issues, and keeping my team motivated. The pressure was intense, but it felt good. Purposeful. Like I was doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing. Nothing like Ryan's claim that I couldn't handle the stress, or that the job would be too much for me. By Thursday afternoon, we'd exceeded our enrollment goal, and my boss sent an email to the executive team highlighting our success. I sat at my desk feeling genuinely proud and thinking about how different my life would be right now if I'd listened to Ryan and taken that receptionist job. Friday morning, Courtney called to tell me she was filing the restraining order petition that afternoon. She'd compiled 2 months of documented harassment into a legal petition with exhibits showing the pattern of behavior. The timeline of contact attempts, the workplace interference, the fake social media profiles, the text from the unknown number. Everything organized and presented as evidence of ongoing harassment. The court date was set for 3 weeks out. Ryan would be served with papers notifying him of the petition and the hearing date. Courtney warned me again that getting served might trigger an escalation. She told me to be extra careful about my surroundings and to call the police immediately if he showed up anywhere near me. I thanked her and hung up, feeling both relieved that something was finally happening and nervous about what Ryan would do when he found out. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with Lorelai before my team arrived. She sat across from me in the HR conference room with her notepad ready. I explained that Courtney had filed the restraining order petition, and Ryan would be served within the next few days. Lorelai nodded and made notes in my file, connecting it to the previous complaint about the fake LinkedIn profile and the fraudulent ethics accusation. She thanked me for keeping HR informed and said the documentation created a clear pattern that protected both me and the company. She asked if I wanted security to have Ryan's photo, and I said yes. The conversation took maybe 10 minutes, but I felt better knowing the company understood this was serious. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. 2 days later, Courtney called me during my lunch break. The process server had delivered the restraining order papers to Ryan at his father's plumbing supply business that morning. She said Ryan immediately called her office and left 3 voicemails, each one angrier than the last. In the messages, he screamed that I was ruining his life and making him look like a criminal in front of his father and the employees. He claimed I was vindictive and that he'd only been trying to have a conversation. Courtney said his reaction was typical of people who genuinely believed they were entitled to access someone regardless of that person's wishes. She added his voicemails to our evidence file because they demonstrated exactly why I needed the protection order. That evening, my dad called me sounding frustrated. Stuart Boyd, Ryan's father, had somehow gotten my dad's cell number and called him at work. Stuart asked my dad to convince me to drop the legal action because it was hurting Ryan's reputation and making things difficult at the family business. My dad told me he'd responded that Ryan hurt his own reputation by harassing me, and that I had every right to protect myself. Stuart tried to argue that boys will be boys and Ryan just loved me too much to let go. My dad shut that down immediately and said if Stuart called again, he'd add it to the evidence file showing the whole family enabled Ryan's behavior. I felt grateful my parents understood and supported my decisions without question. The next 2 weeks passed without any contact from Ryan, which somehow made me more anxious than the constant harassment had. I kept checking my phone expecting angry messages or seeing his car in the parking lot. Courtney explained this was completely normal when I called her worried. She said respondents often went quiet before court hearings, either because their lawyer told them to or because they were planning their defense strategy. The silence felt ominous rather than peaceful. I found myself looking over my shoulder in the grocery store and checking the locks on my apartment door multiple times before bed. On a Wednesday morning, I opened my personal email and found a message from Ryan's mother sent to an address I didn't even know she had. The email was long, probably 8 paragraphs, begging me to remember the good times Ryan and I shared. She wrote about family dinners where I'd laughed at their jokes and holidays when I'd helped her in the kitchen. She said I was breaking up their family and that Ryan had been depressed since I left. She claimed he barely ate anymore and spent all his time in his childhood bedroom. The email painted me as cruel and heartless for pursuing legal action when Ryan just needed closure and a chance to apologize properly. She ended by saying she'd always thought of me as a daughter and couldn't understand how I'd become so cold. I felt sick reading it but didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the entire email to Courtney with a note explaining I'd never given his mother this email address. Courtney replied within an hour saying she was adding it to our evidence file. She wrote that his family enabling his behavior and contacting me on his behalf was part of why Ryan thought his actions were acceptable. She said people who grow up with parents who make excuses for them never learn that their choices have consequences. The email actually strengthened our case by showing the pattern extended beyond just Ryan. At work, things were going surprisingly well despite everything happening in my personal life. My team had been working on enrolling patients for a major trial with a tight deadline. We needed 200 participants by the end of the month, and I'd been coordinating between 3 different research sites to hit our numbers. By Thursday afternoon, we'd enrolled 212 participants, finishing 2 days ahead of schedule. My boss brought it up in our department meeting on Friday, praising my leadership and organizational skills in front of the other directors. I sat there feeling genuinely proud of what I was accomplishing. The work gave me something concrete to focus on when everything else felt chaotic and uncertain. Duncan and I had started grabbing lunch together about once a week. It began casually when we both ended up in the cafeteria at the same time, but it became a regular thing where we discussed trials and strategy. He treated me like a competent colleague, never asking invasive questions about Ryan or making the situation weird. We talked about enrollment challenges and protocol issues and department politics. Having a work friendship that was just about work felt refreshing. Duncan never acted like I was fragile or needed special handling because of the restraining order situation. 3 days before the court hearing, Camilla texted me a screenshot from Instagram. Ryan had created a new account using a variation of his old username. He'd posted a series of photos from our relationship with long captions about how I'd used him and thrown him away when I got my promotion. One photo showed us at his brother's wedding with a caption about how I'd pretended to love his family. Another was from a vacation we'd taken with text about how I'd let him pay for everything, and then abandoned him. The posts were public and already had comments from people I didn't know. I felt exposed in a way the private harassment hadn't made me feel. This was out there for anyone to see, painting me as a villain to strangers. I spent an hour documenting everything. Screenshots of each post, the account details, the timestamps, the comments. I saved it all to my evidence folder and emailed copies to Courtney. Then I made my Instagram account private and blocked the new profile. But the damage felt done. These photos and lies were out there in public where my coworkers and friends could see them. Monday morning, my boss called me into her office before our weekly check-in was scheduled. She closed the door and asked me directly if I was safe. Several employees followed me on social media and had seen Ryan's Instagram posts over the weekend. She'd looked at them herself after someone mentioned it to her. She wanted to know if the company needed to increase security measures or if there was anything else they could do to help. I appreciated her directness instead of dancing around the situation. I explained about the restraining order hearing scheduled for Thursday and assured her that security already had Ryan's photo. She told me to let her know immediately if anything escalated and that my safety was more important than any work deadline. The conversation lasted maybe 15 minutes, but knowing my boss and the company were taking this seriously made me feel less alone in dealing with it. She asked if I wanted to talk through what would happen at the hearing so I'd feel prepared. I explained that Courtney had walked me through the process, but hearing it from someone who'd been through something similar actually helped more than the legal explanation. My boss told me about an ex-boyfriend who showed up at her old workplace 15 years ago, how scared she felt walking to her car every day, how the company back then did nothing to help. She said she made sure when she became a director that her employees would never feel that unsafe. The conversation lasted maybe 20 minutes, but I left her office feeling like someone actually understood how exhausting it was to do good work while constantly looking over your shoulder. That afternoon, facilities management called my extension about reassigning my parking spot. They moved me from the back lot to a space right next to the main entrance, one of the spots usually reserved for executives. Security got an updated photo of Ryan and instructions to call the police immediately if he showed up on company property. I sat in my new parking spot after work that day and felt this wave of anger wash over me. The fact that any of this was necessary, that my company had to treat my ex-boyfriend like a legitimate threat, that I couldn't just park in the regular lot like a normal person. I was mad at Ryan all over again for making my life this complicated, for forcing everyone around me to accommodate his inability to handle rejection like an adult. Thursday morning arrived faster than I wanted. Camilla picked me up at 8 because I didn't trust myself to drive to the courthouse without my hands shaking the whole way. She brought coffee and breakfast sandwiches and didn't try to make small talk when I clearly wasn't in the mood. Courtney met us outside the courtroom at 9:30. She looked professional and calm, which helped settle some of my nerves. She reminded me to stay quiet unless the judge asked me a direct question, to let her handle the legal arguments, to keep my face neutral no matter what Ryan said. We walked into the courtroom and Ryan was already there with his father. No lawyer, No legal representation, just the two of them sitting on the opposite side looking like they thought this was all some big misunderstanding. Ryan wore a button-down shirt and khakis like he was going to a job interview. His dad kept whispering to him and patting his shoulder. The judge called the case and asked both sides to present their positions. Courtney went first, laying out the timeline of harassment with specific dates and examples. She submitted printouts of the voicemails, text messages, emails, fake social media accounts, the complaint to my workplace. The evidence filled a 2-inch binder that she placed on the judge's bench. Ryan's face got red while Courtney talked. When the judge asked if he wanted to respond, Ryan stood up and started talking without any clear organization. He told the judge that I was just mad because he broke up with me, that I couldn't handle rejection, that I was making all of this up to get revenge. The judge looked at the timeline Courtney submitted showing I ended the relationship, then looked back at Ryan. She asked him to explain why he contacted my workplace if he'd broken up with me. Ryan stumbled over his words, said he was just trying to warn them about my character, that he thought they should know what kind of person I really was. The judge asked why he created fake social media accounts. Ryan said he needed a way to tell his side of the story after I blocked him everywhere. His answers kept contradicting his claim that he'd ended the relationship. The judge started asking more specific questions about the workplace complaint. Why did he accuse me of research fraud if he just wanted closure? Why did he contact my company's general information line instead of reaching out to me directly? Ryan got defensive and his voice got louder. He said I was ruining his reputation, that his friends were asking questions, that his family was upset. The judge asked him to lower his voice. His father tried to jump in, and the judge told him firmly that he wasn't a party to this case. Courtney submitted the Instagram posts and Ryan's mother's email as additional evidence of the harassment pattern extending to his family. Ryan started arguing that his mom was just trying to help, that I was being unreasonable by involving the courts. The more he talked, the worse he made his case. His anger right there in the courtroom showed exactly why I needed protection from him. The judge took about 5 minutes to review all the evidence, then granted the restraining order for 1 year. She listed the terms out loud. Ryan couldn't contact me directly or indirectly, couldn't come within 500 feet of my home or workplace, couldn't post about me on social media, or have anyone else contact me on his behalf. Violations would result in immediate arrest. Ryan's mouth actually fell open like he couldn't believe there were real consequences for his actions. His father started to say something, and the judge shut him down immediately. Walking out of the courthouse felt surreal. My legs were shaky, and I realized I'd been holding tension in my whole body for the past hour. Camilla hugged me in the parking lot, and I almost started crying from relief. Courtney reminded me that the restraining order was only a piece of paper. Some people respected them. Some people violated them out of spite. I needed to report any violations immediately, not give him chances or try to handle it myself. She said some people escalate after losing control in court because they're angry about the public humiliation. I promised to call the police at the first sign of any contact. The weekend after the hearing, I barely left my apartment. I felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with being physically tired, just drained from months of dealing with Ryan's harassment and the stress of legal proceedings. By Monday, I felt more like myself again. Work that week was noticeably calmer without the constant background anxiety about what Ryan might do next. I didn't jump every time my phone rang or check over my shoulder in the parking lot. I focused on preparing a presentation for the executive team about outcomes from our major trials. The data looked strong, and I spent hours making sure my slides were clear and compelling. Lorelai called me down to HR on Wednesday. She showed me the official closure of the investigation file, noting that the court order validated everything I'd reported about the harassment campaign. She told me she was really impressed by how professionally I'd handled the situation, that a lot of people would have fallen apart under that kind of pressure. I thanked her for taking it seriously from the beginning, for believing me when Ryan tried to make me look like the problem. Friday afternoon, I presented to the executive team in the big conference room on the top floor. My boss introduced me, and I walked them through the trial data, enrollment numbers, timeline projections, and budget analysis. I answered questions about protocol modifications and patient retention strategies. The CEO spoke up at the end to say my presentation showed exactly the kind of clear thinking and strategic planning the company needed. He said my communication skills and ability to manage complex projects were impressive. I walked out of that conference room feeling genuinely proud. This was what I'd worked for, what all those 60-hour weeks and weekend courses had been building toward. Recognition based purely on my ability to do the job well, nothing to do with anyone's ego or insecurity about my success. 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. The message made my stomach drop. Ryan had used his father's phone to send me 3 paragraphs about how I destroyed his life and turned all his friends against him because of the court case. He said I was vindictive and cruel for getting a restraining order over nothing. He claimed he just wanted to explain his side, and I was being unreasonable by refusing to talk to him like an adult. I took screenshots of every message before he could delete them. My hands shook a little while I pulled up Courtney's contact info and called her office. She answered on the second ring, and I read her the messages word for word. She told me to forward the screenshots immediately and not respond to Ryan at all. She said this was exactly the kind of violation that judges took seriously, because it showed he thought the rules didn't apply to him. I sent her the screenshots while we were still on the phone. She said she'd file the violation report with the court first thing in the morning, and I should expect Ryan to be called in for a contempt hearing. I asked if this meant he'd actually face consequences, and she said yes. Judges don't like it when people ignore their orders right away. That night, I barely slept, worried Ryan would escalate further or find other ways to contact me. But my phone stayed quiet, and I kept checking the screenshots to make sure they were still saved. Courtney filed the violation report on Wednesday morning and called me that afternoon to say the court scheduled a hearing for the following week. She explained that Ryan would have to appear before the same judge who granted the restraining order and explain why he violated it. She warned me that he'd probably make excuses about not understanding the order or claim it was an emergency. The hearing happened on a Tuesday morning, and I took a half day off work to be there. Ryan showed up looking angry and defensive, sitting on the opposite side of the courtroom with his father next to him again. The judge called the case and asked Ryan directly why he contacted me from his father's phone when the restraining order explicitly prohibited any direct or indirect contact. Ryan started saying he just needed closure and wanted to explain how the court case affected his friendships. The judge cut him off and asked if he read the restraining order that clearly stated no contact meant no contact for any reason. Ryan got flustered and said he didn't think one text counted as harassment. The judge's expression got stern, and she said the order wasn't a suggestion. It was a legal mandate with consequences for violations. The judge issued a formal warning right there in the courtroom. She told Ryan that the next violation of any kind would result in immediate arrest and jail time. She said she was giving him one chance to understand that restraining orders exist to protect people from unwanted contact, regardless of the reason for that contact. Ryan's face went red and he started to argue, but his father grabbed his arm to stop him. The judge said the warning was now part of Ryan's court record, and any future violation would be treated as willful contempt. She dismissed us, and I walked out feeling like I could finally breathe properly. Courtney walked me to my car and said this was the moment when most people who harass others finally get that their actions have real legal consequences. She said some people needed to see a judge threaten jail time before they'd actually stop. I thanked her for handling everything so professionally, and she told me to call immediately if Ryan tried anything else. I drove back to work feeling cautiously hopeful that maybe this nightmare was actually ending. The stress from months of Ryan's harassment finally caught up with me, and I realized I needed professional help to process everything. I found Vanessa through my insurance provider and scheduled my first therapy appointment for the following Thursday. Her office was in a quiet building downtown with comfortable chairs and soft lighting that made me feel less nervous about being there. I told her the whole story from Ryan's ultimatum about my promotion through the restraining order and violation hearing. She listened without interrupting, and then said something that surprised me. She told me Ryan's behavior was emotionally abusive long before the harassment campaign started. I'd been so focused on the stalking and workplace interference that I hadn't really thought about how he treated me during our relationship. Vanessa pointed out that demanding I turn down my promotion was controlling behavior designed to keep me dependent and small. She said the articles he sent me and the pressure about his family's opinions were manipulation tactics to make me doubt myself. Over the next several sessions, we worked through how I'd minimized my own achievements during the relationship to avoid triggering Ryan's insecurity. I told Vanessa about staying quiet when his family made comments about my job, or how I'd downplay my successes when his friends asked about work. She asked me why I felt responsible for managing Ryan's emotions about my career. I said I thought I was being supportive and considerate of his feelings. Vanessa shook her head and explained that I was sacrificing my own joy and pride to protect his ego. She said healthy partners celebrate each other's success, instead of requiring the other person to dim their light. I started crying in her office because I realized how much energy I'd spent trying to make Ryan comfortable with my achievements, instead of just being proud of myself. She handed me tissues and told me that recognizing these patterns was the first step toward building healthier relationships in the future. 3 months after the restraining order hearing, I was genuinely thriving at work. I managed 5 major clinical trials simultaneously, and my team respected my leadership without me having to prove myself constantly. I'd stopped second-guessing every decision and learned to trust my expertise and judgment. The trials were progressing smoothly with strong enrollment numbers and good patient retention rates. My boss complimented my organizational systems during our monthly check-in and said the executive team was impressed with my performance. I realized I wasn't walking on eggshells anymore or worrying about what Ryan might do next. The constant background anxiety that had been with me for months finally lifted, and I could focus completely on my work. My team started coming to me with ideas and suggestions instead of just problems, which showed they trusted my leadership style. I took my full lunch breaks without checking my phone every 5 minutes and actually enjoyed the downtown coffee shop near our building. Duncan stopped by my office one afternoon and mentioned he'd heard through industry contacts that Ryan's father's business lost a major contract with a regional hospital system. He said Ryan had apparently been complaining to people that it was somehow my fault for making his family look bad. I felt absolutely nothing except relief that Ryan and his problems weren't mine anymore. Duncan asked if I was okay, and I told him honestly that I didn't care what happened to Ryan or his father's business. He nodded and said that was probably the healthiest response. We grabbed coffee and talked about the new trial protocols coming through our department instead. I appreciated that Duncan never made my past drama into gossip or treated me differently because of what happened. He just stayed professional and friendly without prying into my personal life beyond making sure I was safe. My sister drove up for a weekend visit in early fall and told me within an hour of arriving that I seemed like myself again. She said I looked lighter and more confident than I had in years. We went shopping and out to dinner at a nice Italian restaurant downtown that I could easily afford with my new salary. She ordered expensive wine and I didn't even flinch at the price because I was making good money and could treat myself. Over dinner, she said she'd been worried about me during the relationship with Ryan because I seemed smaller somehow, less vibrant. I asked what she meant, and she explained that I used to talk about work with excitement and pride, but during those 2 years with Ryan, I'd started apologizing for my success, or changing the subject quickly. She said she was glad I left him when I did, because she could see where that relationship was heading. We laughed and clinked our wine glasses, and I felt grateful to have family who supported my choices. 8 months into my director role, the company promoted me to Senior Director of Clinical Trials. My boss called me into her office on a Friday afternoon and told me the executive team wanted to recognize my successful trial outcomes and team leadership with increased responsibility. The promotion came with another salary bump and oversight of additional trial programs across multiple therapeutic areas. I'd be managing a larger team and working directly with the chief medical officer on strategic planning. I accepted immediately without any hesitation or self-doubt. That night, I called my parents to tell them, and my dad said he was proud of how I'd handled everything with Ryan and built my career despite the obstacles. My mom reminded me that the right opportunities come when you're ready for them, and I was clearly ready for this next step. I ran into one of Ryan's friends at a coffee shop the following week while I was grabbing my morning latte before work. He approached me carefully and asked if he could talk to me for a minute. I tensed up but agreed to hear what he had to say. He apologized for believing Ryan's version of events after our breakup and said several people in their friend group had distanced themselves from Ryan after seeing his social media behavior and hearing about the restraining order. He told me that Ryan had been telling people I was crazy and vindictive, but then the court stuff became public knowledge and people started questioning his story. He said he felt bad for not reaching out sooner to check on me and wanted me to know that not everyone bought into Ryan's victim narrative. I thanked him for telling me and said I appreciated the apology. He wished me well and left, and I stood there holding my coffee feeling validated that other people had finally seen through Ryan's manipulation. Vanessa started asking me in our weekly sessions why I always qualified my successes with explanations about luck or timing instead of just owning my achievements. I'd say things like I got promoted because the company needed someone or the timing worked out, and she'd stop me and point out that I earned it through years of hard work and skill. She had me practice saying out loud that I deserved my position and salary without adding any disclaimers or apologies. The exercise felt awkward at first, almost arrogant, but she explained that confident women get labeled as threatening, while confident men get called leaders. We worked through specific examples from my relationship with Ryan, where I'd minimized my accomplishments to make him comfortable, like not mentioning my conference presentations or downplaying positive feedback from my boss. Vanessa helped me see that the right partner would celebrate my success instead of requiring me to shrink myself to protect their ego. She asked me to notice when I started apologizing for taking up space or achieving things, and I realized I did it constantly at work and in social situations. Over several months of therapy, I practiced accepting compliments without deflecting them and talking about my career with pride instead of embarrassment. Camilla called me one evening and said she had a coworker who was single and asked if I'd be interested in meeting him for coffee. I hesitated because dating felt complicated after everything with Ryan, but she promised it would be casual with no pressure. His name was Jason, and he worked in Camilla's marketing department, and we met at a coffee shop downtown on a Saturday afternoon. He asked about my job within the first 10 minutes, and actually listened when I explained clinical trial management instead of changing the subject or making jokes about me being the boss. Jason told me about a project he was leading at work, and we compared notes about managing teams and dealing with difficult stakeholders. The conversation flowed easily without any weird competition or him trying to one-up my accomplishments. We went on 2 more casual dates over the next month, but the chemistry wasn't quite right for anything serious, and we both recognized it. Still, the experience showed me that some men genuinely wanted a partner with ambition, instead of feeling threatened by it. A year after I packed my things and left Ryan's apartment, I was sitting in my office reviewing quarterly reports for the 5 major trials my expanded team was managing. My team had grown to 20 research coordinators and associates, all reporting to me, and we'd successfully enrolled over 3,000 patients across multiple therapeutic areas. The senior director title came with a salary I never imagined making at 32, plus the stock options that were actually worth something now. I'd been on 3 more casual dates in recent months, none turning serious but all enjoyable experiences with people who respected my career. My calendar showed dinner plans with Camilla tomorrow, and brunch with my sister next weekend, the kind of regular friendship investment I'd neglected during my relationship with Ryan. I looked at my team's success metrics and felt genuinely proud without any voice in my head telling me to be humble or apologize for doing well. Choosing myself over Ryan's insecurity wasn't selfish like he claimed. It was necessary for building the life I actually wanted, instead of shrinking into the small space he'd tried to confine me to. Well, that's the epic conclusion of pure mediocrity. If you're still watching, you've got commitment issues, and I respect that. Subscribe and let's make this bad habit official.